so mad. Where in the world is Matt Lauer? Where in the world is Ellison Greenslade? And so it's about the low value cost of Atlanta. So we can talk about it.
On the record tonight, the government's purchase of the Grand Lukine is a hot subject in the news. Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. The daily news cycle is rife with political party jabs, claims of a crisis of one kind or another, or a new investigation needed for some untoward activities. The local media has its hands full with keeping pace with the daily churns. A government 2.5 years into office is battling against growing public discontent, while the opposition tries to convince the public they've cleaned house and atoned for past mistakes. Social media continues to drive a lot of what we consume, and in many ways drives what mainstream media follows. Well, tonight we take a look at the hot topics with the people whose job it is to keep you informed. Tonight's show is a media roundtable with some of the best in the business. But just before we begin, I want to use this opportunity to set the occasion. We had planned this show, and fate dealt this hand that a panel of media experts would be in studio at exactly this time. Yesterday, the local media was stunned and saddened by the passing of one of our own. Acting General Manager of the Broadcasting Corporation, Colin Trotman, passed away suddenly. A giant in television production, his skills were legendary, his work ethic impeccable, and he had a willingness to propel this industry that all of us came to love and appreciate. He was a mentor to so many and a teacher to countless. The kind of colleague who made the work worthwhile by just showing up. And he always showed up and did what was necessary. On a more personal note, he was responsible for editing the very first CNN award I won back in 1998 for the best political story of the year. His passing has left all of us saddened, yet grateful for the decades of service that he gave to the broadcasting industry. Condolences to the Broadcasting Corporation and to his family. Colin, we thank you and we dedicate this show to you. Rest in peace, my friend. I'm your host. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break.
With Trio, you can get everything and more. Get 150% download speed increase than if you got internet alone, an enhanced television experience, and 15 phone features, all for, wait, it's still $99? But we boosted the internet speed. I'm just asking. Okay, fine. Just call 601-2200 and tell them that you want Trio, TV, phone, internet for $99. Powered by Rev. You and us together.
Murder count hit 60 as we round out the summer months. Power outages persist as the public's patience wanes. And a recent spate of crime challenges the notion that crime is in fact down. And the post office saga continues as a broken pipe reignites a controversy that won't seem to go away for the F&M government. Welcome to On the Record. Tonight we take a look at some of the ongoing issues with those who are on the front lines of reporting every day. I want to welcome, once again, Shanique Miller, the host of The Conversation, a show we aired on the ZNS Network, as well as Royston Jones. He's a senior reporter with Eyewitness News, and Tanika Thompson, news editor at the Tribune. Welcome to On the Record.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you so much. Shanique, welcome back.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back.
Always good to have you. And folks, welcome. glad you could make it here glad to have you for the first time.
Happy to be here.
This is always one of my favorite shows because I get to talk to colleagues. But what I try to do today is put together the issues and the topics that I think are on the minds of most Bahamians that you all are reporting on every day. For instance, the Minister of Works, Desmond Bannister, says, despite the outages over the holiday weekend and beyond, BPL is not in a crisis. Admittedly, we have already been told to expect these intermittent outages and load shedding well past the summer. Is this a crisis or just a continuous saga as we try and get to what BPL says will be a resolution at the end of the fall?
Well, I think Desmond Bannister might need to look at the definition of crisis, because if we're not on a crisis with BPL, then I don't know what situation we're in. We've been dealing with this for decades. We know BC, BPL, we've been struggling with power generation, but I think this is the worst it's been in recent memory. And I just think it's unacceptable that we have a high cost of living in the Bahamas, high electricity bills, and we cannot have a reliable power service, and the politicians are giving us lip service and in denial. It's more than frustrating to deal with the power cuts, and then to have someone not be honest. Yes. And even though we know it's not an overnight fix, but pretending it's not an issue or as big an issue as it is makes people more upset, dealing with not having power as well.
Absolutely, or not owning up to it and feeling as though if you ignore it and kind of dismiss it, it goes away, or it is not as prominent in people's view. It is extremely prominent. When you have elderly people from senior citizens' home having to be hauled off to the hospital because of blackouts, when you have people sweltering in their homes and in misery, whether it's overnight, whether it's early morning or midday, that is a crisis. You wonder if we're in Haiti, where there isn't consistent service on a daily basis, perhaps 5-6 hours the power goes out. You're wondering if, are we being punked? Last night, when the power went out after 11, I looked around and well, dear God, when is someone going to tell me this is a joke? Because it's never been funny, but to hear the minister speak up and say, oh, no, this is not a crisis. I too go through this. Sir, we don't care that you go through it. Fix it. Fix it and communicate with the Bahamian people on a regular basis to keep us abreast of what you're doing to fix it.
Does it carry any weight when they say this is not a problem that happened overnight? This is a problem that we met in place. This is a problem that has been persistent and consistent with previous governments. Does that provide any solace to Bahamians?
It provides some context that we've been dealing with this issue for a very long time. But two key things that were said by my colleagues here is lip service and compounding the issue by not recognizing the situation that the average Bahamian is facing, that we are all facing. We've been dealing with this for a very long time, and every summer it gets arguably progressively worse or better, depending on who's in the position or who's in the chair at the board to say so. The communication from BPL has been unfortunately woeful. That has improved in recent weeks as a result of more indication as to when the outages will occur. But even again, the Bahamian public is very frustrated because that information is coming out after the fact. Again, that level of communication compounds the issue of not being able to adequately prepare for these outages. And they're 3 to 5 hours. The difficulty that I think a lot of Bahamians have is the lack of perhaps transparency. Ahead of the summer, you have a chairman and the executives and the political directorate saying that we are prepared. We don't foresee any load shedding. June, BPL has been load shedding since then on a consistent and persistent basis, and that's continued and gotten worse as we've entered the peak of the summer. And instead of recognizing what was said and juxtaposing to what's being said now, there's a distancing from previous comments and a justification. That doesn't help in a situation like this. And I think the Bahamian people, not only dealing with the day-to-day frustrations of this, are angry, and understandably so.
I think I saw somebody last night I don't want to laugh, but it was always hilarious. One of the notices from BPL had references to the Sunshine Twin Theater that's been closed for decades, and somebody said there was even I don't know if it's true, but a reference to like a Nassau shop. And I'm thinking to myself, at what point did somebody review this notice and say, wait a minute, these places no longer exist?
Wow.
Or why would you send out that kind of information? But anyway, that's something for them to answer. But I want to know too, does it help when you have a minister saying, well, it was worse under the PLP, and then the PLP firing back and saying, oh, this is the worst it's ever been, and so now there's the political rhetoric?
No, and I feel as though you're elected to do a job. You're 2 years in, so throwing it back to the PLP only makes you look a bit incompetent, because you have been here 2 years. You said you got rid of Power Secure. They weren't handling things right. You dismissed the former board, threw all kind of aspersions at them. And now when things are still not fixed, you don't want to take responsibility. The buck should stop with you. You're the Minister of Works. You are in charge of all of that. Come clean and say, okay, maybe we fumbled it. Maybe we just didn't have the right foresight. We didn't do the maintenance. But we're working hard to get it fixed. But people want you to be contrite and honest and not blame the government that we voted out of office, because the people weren't satisfied with the Christie administration. They put you there, do the job, and stop blaming others.
People have grown wary, Jerome, extremely wary of this back and forth. Oh, they didn't do it. No, they did. How they did it, people are saying, man, stop this back and forth with this tennis racket and this tennis ball. You now are in charge. You're the one controlling at the helm. Do something. Do not refer to those. As Tanika said, that's why they are no longer in power.
It's a fair point. I asked certain questions as well, because there's some metrics and some timelines that the Bahamian public was promised. But by the first week of July, there would be rental generation coming in from Agreco to supplement summer demand. And we're in August now. There's still a portion of those rental units that have not been installed with no explanation as to why. That's a lack of accountability. And I think that question needs to be answered immediately. This week I had a chance to talk with the chairman of BPL, Donovan Moxie, who said we're going to have a press conference shortly to explain where we are to the Bahamian public. That should have happened last month. It needs to happen. The Bahamian public needs answers. They need to be assured of the way forward and what reprieve that will be offered amid, as you said, high bills. But it needs to be happening today, not next week.
Does this all now really put into the spotlight and even cause us to question more what would have happened with the previous board and what would have led to the sudden the COO suddenly leaving the company? I mean, it now, to me, begins now to shift attention back to what would have had previously, and maybe there was some merit in what previous board members and board chairman like Donnell Osborne were saying.
Well, the former chairman and the other two board members, they're gone. And it was said that I guess they were the cause of the friction, things not getting better. But we see with the new board, things are worse. So I'm wondering, why is there no accountability for them? Why are they still collecting a salary, I'm assuming a good salary, and hiding behind press releases and not coming out amidst all of this chaos and saying what the problem is? So it does raise questions as to, was everyone actually honest about all of those departures, and who was actually to blame for the friction and the problems at BPL? Because things aren't right there. We can't say it's functioning properly, everything's going smoothly, it's the best it's ever been. We're not stupid.
Well, we shall see. They have asked until, they said by November, things, the new generation plan should be up and running, and so we'll see what happens after November. Moving forward, though, as many as 60 murders on record, 4.5 months to go into the year. Even the brother of a sitting MP and minister recently murdered. Police maintain that crime is down. Is this still a realistic assertion?
Crime, as far as the statistics show, is down. Overall, we had numbers presented for the first half of the year by the Commissioner of Police just over a month ago, indicating that crime was down 17%. The numbers are one aspect of this whole assessment. It's true that murders are down, armed robberies are down, and in most major categories of violent crime, crime is down. Do those numbers offer comfort to the Bahamian public? Does it mean that I think about a 17% decrease in crime and I don't look over my shoulder as I go home? Do I not concern myself with the places I go at night and late at night and where I drive? It doesn't, the numbers and the adjustment of numbers and the decrease is a positive thing. And I think it's an opportunity to thank the Royal Bahamas Police Force and the hard-working men and women who are pushing every day to do so. But the numbers don't offer comfort to the person who has been a victim of crime, who's lost a family member to crime, who's lost a loved one to a murder. They don't feel, unfortunately, different. And the fear of crime is still very, very high in the Bahamas.
And the fact is, crime levels were so high over the past, 10 years, that a reduction, while it's a good thing, it's still so high that you really can't boast about it. And most people don't feel safe. It's an armed robbery or 2 armed robberies almost every day, murders all the time. So yes, there's a reduction, but the level of violence in the Bahamas, particularly Nassau, is very high. So I don't blame the police. The police's job is to arrest suspects, close cases, and provide some level of security. But we have to look at the societal issues, poverty, lack of conflict resolution skills. We have a problem in the Bahamian psyche that is causing all of this violence. And until we figure out how to deal with our youth, even some of our adults have no, conflict resolution.
A lot of our adults.
Yeah. We're going to have the same cycle. So while we might have a decrease in murders, we had it last year, might have it this year, the levels are very high. And it's something ingrained in our society that is deep-rooted and it's not going to go away overnight.
Town Centre Mall is now the site of the new main post office after years of complaints about inadequate facilities at the East Hill Street main post office. We have a brand new, spacious, modern facility, new accommodations. The facility is long overdue. We're not going to argue about that. But at what price? A former cabinet minister, Brent Simonet, is part owner of the mall itself. A resolution came to Parliament for the lease, seeking approval from the government to pay rent for the government to pay rent for the space. Yet days after the resignation, the now former minister revealed during an appearance on your show, Shanique, that he and the Prime Minister had a conversation prior to this whole parliamentary approval. Did you expect that, first of all?
I did not expect it. I decided that I would put the question to him, and I put it in a very open way to give him as much leeway as possible to tell me whatever he wanted to tell me. And so the question was posed, what about this Town Centre Mall deal? What is it that you want to tell the Bahamian people about this so that we're all clear? Something to that effect. And when he went into it and he said that, the Prime Minister called him, I think they were both off island, and the Prime Minister called him at 3 or so in the morning.
Said we're going through with the deal.
Right, and we're going to do this. Don't worry, it's going to get done. How much is it going to be, etc. And it was a moment that it just kind of like, okay.
Did he just really?
Okay, and the thoughts. I mean, I don't want to put what the opinions are, but many people feel as though he was very strategic in ensuring that people knew exactly how it all played out and got to this point.
I have to ask you, what did that then do to reignite this whole issue?
Well, I have to give Shanique credit because that was a bombshell.
Mm-hmm.
I think even though the Town Centre Mall issue was like a political football conflict of interest claims, it had kind of been put to bed to some extent, and that just reignited everything. And what was even a bit more telling was the statement the OPM's office released afterwards, sort of saying they didn't want to comment on private conversations and suggesting Brent Simonet might have breached some confidentiality. So it just raised more questions, and they still haven't been sufficiently answered. And yes, they had the parliamentary debate and the resolution, but no one ever said, oh, I did call Brent Simonet. Whether it was before Cabinet had discussions or not, I can only assume because no one's specifically said. It just leaves you with a little bad taste in your mouth. And if you are the government of transparency, if people have questions, just answer them. Put it to bed, make everyone feel a bit better about the situation.
We've got to take our first break in the show. We'll pick up this conversation, particularly this issue of the Town Centre Mall, right after this. A quick break on the record. We'll come back right after this. Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true, and open debate they've been looking for.
And the icon goes to On the Record.
On the Record was born out of a desire to do something different. What we do every day helps our country, it helps our society, it helps to shape the views and opinions.
Listen, what is more dangerous than
Gentlemen,
corruption?
we've got to move
Is it
very quickly.
illusion
Let's
or
wrap up.
integrity?
It's all On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break.
This portion of On the Record is brought to you by Generali Insurance Company Limited, your employee benefit specialist.
The Progressive Liberal Party recently held its first convention since their 2017 election defeat. The party offices were returned virtually unopposed, save a bitter battle for chairman between Obie Wilscombe and Fred Mitchell. Mitchell retained his position as chairman. Out of that convention, though, party leader Philip Brave Davis indicated that the opposition will be moving a resolution for a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. The government side balked at the move, even goading the opposition to bring it on. You're watching On the Record, where my guests tonight are the esteemed group of journalists, none other than Shanique Miller, host of The Conversation on the ZNS Network, Royston Jones, a senior reporter with Eyewitness News, and Tanika Thompson, news editor at The Tribune. Before we delve into the PLP, I want to talk a little bit more about the post office Brent Simonette saga. Since Mr. Simonette's appearance on your show, Shanique, former AG Alfred Sears has been suggesting that the Prime Minister may have misled Parliament over all of this, calling, saying that this conversation actually happened when it should not have happened.
Yeah.
I think at one point we were told that once this discussion came up, even in cabinet, Brent Simonette was excused from the meeting. But now
what he disclosed, because the resolution said one thing, and his disclosure was, no, it was this conversation happened and I was asked about it. And he even, almost to the point, he's like, are you sure this is something we should be talking about? He said that as well, or suggested that as well in the interview with me, basically suggesting that he too had issues with should this private one-on-one conversation be going on. But he said that the agreement was made. They're going to move forward with Town Center Mall, and also, how much is it that you're going to be charging?
I do have a question, and this is a larger question having to do with conflicts of interest, particularly in the Bahamian context. We're a small society. A lot of our politicians are rich. They are business people. This isn't the first time that a member of the government or a sitting cabinet minister, a member of the government has a business that's entered into a business arrangement with a sitting government. It has happened in the past. Is it almost inevitable because of the small society we are in? Is it almost inevitable because people in big business get into politics? And then how do we avoid this happening in the future?
I think we're at a time where public distrust of governments is very, very high, especially coming on the tail end of the last administration. There is some merit to the fact that we live in a small society, and it is difficult to not do business with certain individuals who are either associated, relatives of, or in politics, especially at the executive level. It requires a degree of trust from the public, but it also requires a degree of transparency from the government.
But the government will say, hey, we brought the resolution to Parliament.
Certainly.
We brought it forward and said he has a sitting cabinet minister has an interest in the Town Center Mall. We are putting the post office there. Their argument is we brought it to Parliament for it to be transparent.
Right. That argument holds some water, that we're a small society and there might be conflicts. And I think Brent Simonette had said, well, because I'm a businessman, does it mean I shouldn't get any work with the government when others have? But even if it's not a conflict, you should avoid the appearance of a conflict.
Even the appearance.
The government had previously selected the Fields building on Gladstone Road for the post office. And the Tribune had the story a few weeks back that the engineer's report didn't find any serious issues with the building, and then I think shortly after the government got the report, they were saying, oh, it would cost $4 million to repair, and the building was gutted. So it just makes you wonder, why switch from that location and give it to a sitting cabinet minister? Yes, you disclosed. Yes, you brought it to Parliament.
You claim it's the best deal.
Right. So
and then you had a pipe. You said that
Yeah.
that Phil's wasn't adequate, but then you had a situation where we almost had a major flood in the new facility.
Right.
So then, of course, it raises questions again whether it's structurally sound.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so be it. We'll see how this plays out. Well, the opposition leader says that they intend to bring a motion of no confidence to Parliament in October when the House resumes. Is this practical given the small number that the PLP has in Parliament? Does it make sense for them to bring this motion of no confidence? Is it a waste of time? Is it showboating? Or will it really test the temperature of the country?
I don't want to say it's a waste of time. We're a democracy. If the opposition wants to do it, they can. Obviously, I don't see it as being successful. We've already had McAlpine saying he would abstain. So it might show a little bit of the fraction in the party, but the FNM has an overwhelming majority. I do think it is disingenuous for Brave Davis to say he's bringing a vote of no confidence. Yes, the Minister administration has had some missteps, some mistakes, some things people are angry about. But the Christie administration had so many scandals, so many issues that people were unsatisfied. And Brave Davis sat as Deputy Prime Minister in that administration. So to me, it's a bit disingenuous to see him sort of on a moral high horse saying, well, we're going to bring this vote of no confidence in this administration when, you already had your vote of no confidence when you were voted out of office. So I think while you should keep the government's feet to the fire, you're just bringing this to make political points.
The Deputy Prime Minister has called it a fool's errand. Prime Minister has said, bring it on. Yet Speaker Holson Moutry says it's the opposition's right to do so. He will accommodate it.
It certainly is. It is the opposition's right to do so, as been pointed out. I think I can't get into the mindset of the PLP, but if I were to take an educated guess or a guess, then I'd say it's more symbolic. There's already an indication from Frederick McAlpine, the Pine Ridge MP, that he'll abstain. I think there's an expectation for who have been labeled the dissidents. We're talking about the Von Albury,
Vaughan Miller.
The Von Miller, I'm sorry, and the Reese Chipmans of what they will do. Maybe it's an attempt symbolically to get FNM MPs to either abstain or maybe even vote against the Prime Minister. I think it's also part of the rebranding of the PLP. I think the leader of the PLP, Brave Davis, is trying to distance himself away from, in a way, the Christie administration or the legacy and the scandals of the Christie administration by making this symbolic vote, which he hopes will set a different standard for the PLP in reshaping their image to the public as untarnished by the previous actions of the previous administration.
We're going to talk about the rebranding.
I'm not sure if that's going to be successful.
We're going to talk about the rebranding of the PLP a little later. Shanique, you wanted to get in on this?
Yeah, I agree with Royston and Tanisha. It's almost to sort of just appease and appeal to that dissatisfaction that's happening in pockets, or great deal of pockets across this country, and a little of political theatrics as well. The PLP, coming off the high of a convention, needs to continue being out there to appear as though, hey, we are gearing up this engine headed towards election, and we intend, as both said, to keep this government's feet to the fire. I don't think it's wise for the Prime Minister to say, bring it on. I mean, I don't, regardless of how maybe senseless it may be, or this vote of no confidence, sometimes you just, certain things don't deserve a response or the attention. That perhaps is one of them, given the FNM's power in the House, in Parliament.
You mentioned it, and this brings me now to Frederick McAlpine, who, when questioned about how he would vote, said he would abstain from voting on the no confidence motion. This, of course, triggered renewed calls for his resignation and more calls for his resignation from the party, given his continued public disputes with the Prime Minister and the government over a number of issues, VAT, post office, just to name a few. Should he resign?
I think he should leave the FNM. I believe his road has ended. You can see it's a fractured relationship. It's his right, and as he should speak out when he thinks the party is not living up to its promises, maybe heading in the wrong direction. But I think it goes beyond that. It seems like there's a lot of personal tension, maybe with him and Dr. Minnis. I think he called Dr. Minnis petty at one point. And of course, we don't know all of the reasons why. We can speculate. I would assume maybe he wanted a cabinet position. And
that's always been said from within the party.
Right.
That this is a case of sour grapes.
Right. I don't see, and with his new association chairman calling for him to leave the party, I doubt he'll get a nomination from the FNM unless they have some come to Jesus moment between now and the next election. So I just wonder where he sees his future. It's hard to be elected as an independent candidate. It's happened a few times, but generally speaking, Bahamians will support PLP FNM.
And as I put it to someone just yesterday evening, independents are elected when a particular party chooses not to run a candidate in a particular constituency. Or I said this whole curious state of Frederick McAlpine.
I'm not sure whether, despite the calls from the association for him to consider or resign, and the likelihood of getting a nomination from the FNM seems unlikely, there does seem to be a personal rift between himself, the administration, in particular the Prime Minister. But I'm more concerned that as a backbencher in the Parliament, that there is a constant narrative and historical or traditional notion that backbenchers who are outspoken and who criticize the government are cast aside. They have backbenchers who are critical, and it's their job to be somewhat critical and somewhat questioning of the government and its actions has a purpose and a role. And it's unfortunate, I think, that that position traditionally held by people like McAlpine, and we saw it in the last administration with Dr. Andre Rollins, who ended up shifting over, along with Mr. Wells as well, that there's a unfortunate rift and split between backbenchers, typically who are critical of an administration, when they have a place for that as well. Whether he should resign or not, we'll leave that to Mr. McAlpine.
Do you see, though, and it's interesting you use the words dissidents, do you see McAlpine, a Vaughan Miller, and Reece Chipman as those dissidents? And do you see that growing? Or is McAlpine's case a little different?
I think his case, and while the three have been quite outspoken, each expressing in no uncertain terms their thoughts on whatever government decision there is, his position and his situation appears to be just a little different. And as was pointed out by Royston and Tanika, it just appears to be just a little bit more than what the other two are doing. The other two, Vaughan Miller appears to be all about country, like he's fighting in the middle of the road. Reece Chipman with his fight. McAlpine appears to just have just a little bit of, you can always tell when it's just tainted a little bit with maybe, and I don't want to misspeak, but just as though maybe not feeling gratified because something did not quite happen his way.
There's an undertone.
Yeah, there's an undertone.
Interesting. Okay. The PLP has just come through a national general convention. The party says it's had time to do some introspection since the last election, and they've atoned for their past deeds and have rebranded. Has the PLP been able to convince the Bahamian people that it's a new party? Royston, I'm going to start with you.
That's a very tough question. I can't speak on behalf of the Bahamian electorate. They've surprised me at just about every turn over the last few years of being in journalism. Whether or not the PLP has successfully rebranded itself, time will tell. There are junctures or different junctures to measure that, and ultimately the general election will measure that finally. There is an effort by changing the constitution of the party at the last convention, by our sort of making recognition that they've made mistakes in the past, by encouraging new participation and new ideas. It all sounds very good towards a rebranded party, but I think the word atonement used hasn't been sufficiently met. I don't think the party has sufficiently recognized the missteps, mistakes, and scandals of the last administration and sufficiently corrected those, enough so to be seen as a new party in the eyes of the people. But there's a lot of time for that to happen. You have a lot of great minds who are stepping forward within the party, and I hope that's encouraged. There's an internal debate currently about whether or not the older veterans of the PLP should be allowed to.
I've got to hit the pause button there. We've got to take a break, but we're going to continue that discussion, particularly on the rebranding of the PLP right after this. If you're enjoying our discussion, stay tuned. Our show continues right after this. Hello and welcome to On the Record, and the balanced, true, and open debate you've been looking for.
With Trio, you can get everything and more. Like our television, you're going to get an enhanced experience. And when we say enhanced, we mean enhanced. Like RevGo Play, the app that lets you take TV anywhere. Watch your favorite shows, all for free. Just call 601-2200 and tell them that you want Trio TV, phone, internet for $99. Powered by Rev. You and us together.
And welcome back to this edition of On the Record. Every so often, I invite media colleagues for a roundtable discussion on what's making news. I'm happy to have on my panel this week Shanique Miller. She's the host of The Conversation on the ZNet Network. Royston Jones, a senior reporter with Eyewitness News, and Tanika Thompson, news editor at the Tribune. As we went into the break, we started talking about the Progressive Liberal Party's recent convention and whether the PLP had sufficiently and successfully rebranded itself. Shanique, I'm going to swing over to you. Is this a new PLP? Have they been able to convince the public that it's not the same business as usual?
I think the PLP is making a great deal of effort to get that across to the public. For example, you hear Brave Davis and his top team talking about we don't want many familiar faces, if any at all. We have a deep bench of people wanting to vie for each constituency. We need that new, fresh energy, new, fresh ideas, people who are willing to hit the road as soon as we are elected, should they be successful in 2022, to hit the road running. And so they're trying to present this sort of new, energetic, very, very, very ready and prepared group of people that is sort of like this elected bunch for the PLP. Is that resonating? I'm not sure. At first, I was like, whoa, this is something to kind of look at. And then during convention, when certain pronouncements were made that in terms of, no, you don't vie for this position, you don't vie for that, then the talk on the ground began to be something different.
That now brings me to my next question. Was it wise for Davis to ask, Brave Davis to ask that his team not be challenged for leadership, as if, we go with it, with what is it, ride the wave? And his team, he almost threw down the gauntlet and said, I don't expect that there will be any challenges.
No, because the PLP will always say this, at convention, all positions are open for contest. And we know sometimes it's just political rhetoric. Behind the scenes, people might be telling someone don't run or trying to dissuade them. But for Brave to say it publicly and, double down on it almost, it made you wonder, well, is he insecure? Why wouldn't you want to challenge? If you know you have the best team, you have already shored up this support, why would you worry if someone else challenged? That's their right to do so. So to me, it just didn't bode well for him and maybe the way he feels about the party.
And then there was almost an assault on Obi Wilsham, who decided to challenge the position as chairman. And I think it caused even some of us in the media to take a step back and look and go, well, is this the same old PLP?
Well, these kind of contests are always nasty, and politics is a nasty game. And Obi lost. He tried to run. He pled his case. He lost. But I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing. I think he'll be welcomed back into the fold. The PLP is kind of that kind of party where, you could talk about me or whatever else, but once you're a PLP, we'll keep you in. But back to your question of did the PLP rebrand? I think at the convention, they made their constitutional changes. I think they added more delegates or stalwart councillors to sort of broaden the voting process. So I think they're doing things internally to make their members and supporters happy. But whether that'll resonate to the wider electorate, I don't know. Brave Davis was DPM under the last administration, served as acting prime minister at some points. One major scandal under his watch was the Bamsey dormitory catching on fire, had no insurance. He misled Parliament about it, saying the building was insured. We found out it wasn't insured. And there was never any repercussions. Who paid for that building to be rebuilt? We did. I don't think the contractor was forced to put any money up. So while he might be trying to organize things and present a new face, you have to wonder if he's given the chance again, will the governance be any different than the last administration?
Leslie Miller has publicly chastised the party's leadership and others for seemingly, even at this point, denying them the opportunity to run as candidates in the next election. Is that going to be a problem? What do you say? Only my ma? Is that going to be a problem?
It likely will be if those issues aren't bombed sufficiently with maybe some promise of appointment or some other avenue for those officials or those public figures who are of the last administration to participate in some meaningful way if they want to do so publicly. I think it will be an issue. I don't think the PLP should have the notion that if they present a slate of new faces, it's an automatic rebranding. We saw new faces, for example, we've been talking about it tonight, is Bahamas or the Bahamas Electricity Corporation going to BPL. A new name, a new set of faces, a new board doesn't necessarily translate
Same problems.
Correct. And the PLP shouldn't make the mistake of thinking new faces and new ideas will win over the electorate automatically.
Just 1 second, on the Leslie Miller front, I think Leslie Miller, and I hate to use this word, but people called into my show and say he sounds entitled. Well, Obi Wilshcombe, who appeared on the show a few days ago, said, this is the Leslie Miller who took out of his own pocket for years and carried the PLP. This is the Leslie Miller who has been an upstanding member of Parliament in the Blue Hills and Tall Pines constituency. And so Leslie Miller, he's made some very strong statements.
And he resonates with his constituents.
He continues to resonate. And so I doubt he will go anywhere anytime soon.
Which brings me to my final question on this. Is there a place for a Leslie Miller and an Obi Wilshcombe in the new PLP when seemingly there is a place for a Fred Mitchell and a Brave Davis?
Someone, a senior member of the PLP told me this. If you lost in the last election, you served several terms, step aside. Let someone else go. You can't keep clinging to this hope. You might win the seat.
But it seems that Fred Mitchell is on that track to get the nomination.
Right.
Nobody said no, Fred.
Right, and I guess it remains to be seen whether he will get it. But I don't think you should feel as though you're automatically entitled to that nomination when you lost your seat. If you care about the party and if you come with some scandals or baggage, and Leslie Miller is very controversial, whether you love him or hate him, he grabs headlines because he says whatever he wants to say.
He says what other people are thinking sometimes.
Right. And he's a controversial person. And if you want your party to succeed in the next election and people are saying, look, maybe some of the older MPs shouldn't come back because the people spoke and told us they didn't want you. Step aside and mentor someone young. It doesn't mean you have no place in the party. I think maybe for a career politician, it's hard to give it up. I only can imagine how it feels to be an MP. Over here, you're like a rock star almost. But at the same time, you have to be a bit of a realist. If you want to help your party win, there are other ways to do it as opposed to just being the parliamentary representative. The
government continues to grapple with some unwanted bad publicity, the most recent involving comments from Water and Sewerage Board member Bennett Minnis, who called the PLP corrupt, thieving, no-good, bastard, homosexual African monkeys. That's a lot. Prime Minister is on record saying only that it has been dealt with. Is that sufficient? Is that enough?
Not close. Not close. And those are very. Those words still hurt and go to the core. When you talk about black African monkey, we see what's happening in the United States because of words and the tension.
Words
that's
matter.
Going on. Words matter, and the tension it's created to the fact that it's spurred some people on to we can only assume just based on the atmosphere and the environment there. To carry out acts of violence on others, mass shootings. And so bringing it back home for this gentleman to just brazenly attack someone who's a part of the government structure here, the leader of the opposition, and nothing be said. He holds a position in a public government agency, and that we are paying him. He should not hold those views. Yeah, those are your personal views. However, hold them privately somewhere, sitting on some private board, but not a board where the Bahamian people are paying.
I think I'd go a step further in saying that there's no room for racially charged comments, homophobic comments in society, period, private or public. If we take a step back and see the context in which that was said, and maybe there was an assumption that it was a private conversation between Mr. Bennett and Ms.
Public.
That became public.
It entered the public.
In today's society, you have to expect that anything you say publicly is subject to being made
And then you are a part of a board.
You are part of a government structure, as pointed out. You're part of a board. Not only do we have an expectation, and I think the public has or should have an expectation for a greater degree of responsibility from public officials, those kind of comments, private or public, have no place in society. Whether or not it has been handled as the Prime Minister has asserted, I'm curious as to how.
We all are curious. Don't just tell me it's been handled.
I think he had said that, he told, may have been Jasper Ward of The Guardian, and said that you read the papers, it's been handled. And the question should have been asked, well, how exactly has it been handled?
Yeah.
What has happened? At the very least, personally, I think a public apology should be issued. Whether or not that's sufficient, I think the public will have to decide, and whether or not he should resign or be fired, the public would ultimately have their say on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the response was inadequate. At the very least, the minister responsible, Desmond Bannister, or the Prime Minister should have condemned the comments and just say, that doesn't reflect the FNM's viewpoint, because Bennett Minnis is also, I think, a campaign general. He's a part of the FNM, so it's separate from him also being on the Water and Sewerage Board.
It has no place, yeah.
Yeah, it has no place, and like Shanique said, words matter. When you see the U.S. president using that kind of rhetoric, it trickles down into the consciousness and emboldens other people to just be wild and say whatever they want to say, and it could lead to violence. And I think the rhetoric the FNM sometimes uses is that the PLP believes the Bahamas is for them. So you have someone in your party saying the PLP can't come to a part of Long Island. No, the Bahamas is for all of us. So just condemn it, public apology like Royston said, and put it to bed.
Yeah, for real. Free National Movement Youth Armed Torchbearers Association is getting ready for a convention in another week or so. Very public. There are posters and billboards everywhere. Frederick McAlpine says the convention is being used by older members to answer the PLP, as he calls it. He says it's sad. True or not? I mean...
Well, I did hear from one of my reporters that they were told by someone in the FNM that that's where the party will respond to the PLPs and their convention. And it shouldn't be the place for it. It should
Have
be...
your own convention.
Right, yes.
I mean, which was, I think, McAlpine's assertion.
Well, and I guess when you have a national convention, the issue of a leadership challenge always comes up. Whether anyone would do it against Minnis, we don't know. But I think that's what they're going to use this youth convention for, knocking the PLP, bringing up the past scandals, and hopefully they talk about the way forward and what they are doing, their policies, give more education on that. But I think it will be a bit of mudslinging.
Is this an opportunity, though, for more young voices to be heard, or do you think we're going to expect just more party rhetoric?
It certainly should be an opportunity to showcase some of the young talent within the country and within specifically the FNM. I'm still hoping it is that. When you look at the list of speakers, there are a few familiar faces, which may be indicative of the point you made, that we're going to hear this attempt to further attack and answer questions that the PLP have laid on the feet of the government. But it should be a great opportunity to see some of the young talent coming up the ranks of the FNM and who those faces are. I look forward to that.
I just think it's interesting that there's such when I look at the advertising for it already, I mean, it's almost on the level of a political campaign almost, the amount of billboards and signs. They must have lots of money. You're watching On the Record. Our final segment is coming up right after this. Hello and welcome to On the Record, and the balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. this is our final segment of On the Record. My guests, Shanique Miller, Royston Jones, Tanika Thompson, all in our Media Roundtable. We're going to come off of politics slightly, talk about some issues that I think are still important. The Ministry of Health says it will investigate physicians selling fraudulent sick slips. The services were actually promoted on WhatsApp via these WhatsApp messages. What does it say when our medical practitioners, the people we trust with our lives, are in the business now of selling sick slips, selling documents about our health that are fraudulent? I mean, what?
Well, this has been, I remember this being a big issue years ago.
Yes.
When everyone kind of knew you could always
From
get
a specific doctor.
Right.
Yes.
And I remember, I think it was a big issue in the public service, maybe under the last Ingram administration that had been talked about. So I'm not surprised. You know, someone will always try to run a scam if they could. But then it does kind of leave you with a level of distrust. If you're a physician, you know, you take a certain oath and you are running scams on the government, it makes you wonder, well, where is our society kind of?
What that says, that's exactly where our society is. That's where the Bahamas is. We are trying to get over people to make a quick buck if we can. A very dishonest society the Bahamas has become. And it appears as though, now, as you said, this kind of scam, I guess, has been going on. You know you can go to Dr. So-and-so and get that slip for a week. Or you just pay, you know, what you have to pay. But the thing is, that's just us. We are so busy trying to get over and to win.
But does it then now feed into this whole issue of the fact that we are such a lawless society? I mean, I always say it starts with the small things. And then it leads into greater things. You've got people going to court, you know, for stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from government. I mean, it starts at this level, and then it's accepted almost.
We talk about the degree of corruption in Bahamian society, and it is rampant for things that people are sort of inherent and normalize. The big conversation has been over the last few years of customs. And I think the Prime Minister had addressed it at one point, saying that if you go through customs with your purchases from the U.S. and you try to hide them and bundle them up under your suitcase, you are corrupt and you've committed a crime. This is from top down, unfortunately, systemic. There is a wider conversation happening. I believe it's a few people among physicians who are assisting and facilitating this process. And major employers have been aware of this for years. Places like Atlantis have known or have a black list of names of physicians. If you hand in a sick note from that particular doctor, they know they're on to you.
But then, you know, you talk about that list that exists, but then this doctor is allowed to continue. And, you know, and my point is, so when does it, you know, at what point does the society begin to hold these people accountable? Because if as an employer I know that, and I have that blacklist, how do I now advance that?
That translates. You report that to Department of Labor once you've built a sufficient case of a number of people. The Department of Labor reviews and conducts their investigation, which is, I'm sure, a slow process, unfortunately, but they're trying to make some improvements there. But you're right, there's not the degree of accountability and consequence that you would expect in a society that takes corruption seriously. But there, even beyond sick slips, there are known physicians and doctors who perform abortions in the country, which are illegal, and that's a whole different conversation about whether or not how to move forward with that. But at current, the law says it's illegal. There are doctors performing it. And are there consequences for that? Have you seen any doctor taken before the court as a result of those practices?
On the offshoot of the abortion, you know, I am pro-choice, so I believe in women having, you know, reproductive rights. The issue with it being under the table or, you know, an illegal matter is a woman, I guess, would have no recourse if she has a botched procedure or if she is violated in some way. Abortions are happening. I know several women or younger girls who have had to have an abortion or some procedure. One ended up in the hospital because of the heavy bleeding after the fact. And she told me she was told by the physician, when you go to the hospital, don't tell them where you've been and what you were given. So it leaves women at a disadvantage. We know you
can't even say what is really wrong.
Exactly. And I guess the doctors would suspect something. So you have these physicians doing it, and I believe women should have the right to choose if that's what they want to do, but it should be in a regulated, safe environment. We can't keep saying, oh, abortion is illegal, it's wrong, but it's happening. So
let's have another conversation.
Yeah.
Right? Agreed. Similarly, the state of the Pawtuski dock has been discussed quite a bit over the past few weeks. Images of trash, unsanitary conditions have been making the rounds on social media and in the mainstream news. I looked at it and I thought, are we just nasty?
Yes. Yes. In a word, yes. And the thing is, okay, who's at fault? Us. We are at fault, one, because we're nasty. Look at our habits. Here we are. We have a total disregard for our laws, for the environment. We will dump and throw and whatever. The minute we get on a plane off Miami International Airport, we know to either bag it until we can put it in a trash.
Yeah.
It's our habits.
But now we want the government to come in and clean up. But this is a facility that's used by people in private business every day.
I saw a video clip a few days ago. A man in Spain took a refrigerator and he tipped it off of a cliff. He had his friend record it and he was laughing, saying, "Oh, I'm recycling." The police made him drag that refrigerator up the cliff and they videotaped him literally pulling it up. And he also had to pay a fine of several $1,000. I think it was maybe near $50,000. And then he had to dispose of the refrigerator properly. So you're going to have people all over the world doing these kinds of things, but it's enforcement of the law. And I give the government credit. They have an environmental court now, and they are bringing people for various infractions and fining them. And I think it needs to be more widespread because it is nasty, and it shouldn't be acceptable.
And then it becomes a political issue. You know,
You're not doing the job of keeping the country clean.
Right.
I find it strange, though. I still haven't understood the Bahamian psyche, or of anyone who would drive in an environment and take a Wendy's or a KFC bag once they're finished with it, ball it up, open their window, and toss it out. How does that feel right? And I think we all have to take a look at ourselves and look at our environment and take more responsibility in the communities that we're in to ensure that doesn't happen. It's not the government's responsibility solely. There is a process for disposal of trash, and I think we need to better regulate ourselves. I think we need to have better recycling facilities and make it easier for people to dispose of trash. But it's something very strange happening where somebody can dump something. And we saw it with BPL as well. The reason for one of the major blackouts quite recently was somebody with a dump truck dumping illegally.
and then, of course, taxpayers have to pay to have it cleaned up at the end of the day. Well, I just wanted to sort of bring those in as our final segment, as some of the things that, you know, that you all deal with on a daily basis that are in the media that, you know, sometimes brings to light the unfortunate things that happen day to day in our country and the behavior that we exhibit. So hopefully through our discussion, people will stop throwing out their trash and stop going to the doctor for fake sex slips. Folks, I want to first of all thank you for coming on and spending this hour with me. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the conversation. Media folks always bring a different perspective, and I thank you so much. And continue to do the great job that you do. I know it's not easy. I've lived it. I continue to live it in some ways, so I know that it's not an easy job and sometimes a thankless job. But thank you so very much for coming and spending time and keeping up the good work.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you so very much. Well, we hope that you have enjoyed our show tonight. Special thanks to my guests, Shanique Miller, Royston Jones, and Tanika Thompson. Before we go, I want to take this opportunity, though, to say a very special thank you to someone who is very special to us here on the Record. Shanae Smith started with us as our social media specialist and eventually became the producer of the show. She leaves us now to move on to another milestone in her career. I want to take this opportunity to express our heartfelt gratitude to Shanae for the stellar service that she has given to this program and to the station. She has certainly contributed significantly to the success of our program. We certainly will miss her, but we wish her well in her new endeavors, and we wish her all the best. Godspeed to you, Shanae. On behalf of my technical staff, thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. We'll see you next time.